Hey everybody, this is Mr. Moblin coming at you with another APGov video. We're continuing our tour through topic 2.2, focusing in on structures, powers, and functions of Congress. So far in this topic, we've looked at the leadership in the House and leadership in the Senate. We've delved into committees. But, of course, when we think about Congress and its primary function, of course, we are thinking about lawmaking, crafting legislation. And this, ladies and gentlemen, brings us to really, the crystallization of what this is about. Yes, you've heard of it, how a bill becomes a law. Now, when we do talk about how a bill becomes a law, you got to understand that this process is designed to be a long, drawn-out process. At times as we're going to go through this, it's going to seem absurdly long. It's going to seem, that, like you can't get legislation done. It seems like there's so many obstacles and so many, things that you have to do along the way. But that's what the founders wanted. The founders wanted a lawmaking process that was very, very tough. In their mind, it is better to, not have certain laws than to have bad laws. So as we go through here, you're having to go through the various committee steps and go through multiple chambers and possible rewrites and all this kind of stuff. The idea being is that whatever does make it all the way through, if it is able to go through all of these steps, all of these processes, and survive, well, then that must be a pretty important law. That must be a pretty good law. That must be a pretty necessary law. And so when you think of lawmaking, I want you to think of a slow, deliberative process, or at least a slower, more deliberative process than you're probably used to thinking. You know how government is. We sometimes like to use those food metaphors. We talk about cake with federalism. Well, with regards to crafting legislation, I like to think of, a nice looking brisket. Take a look at that brisket right there, a little smoked brisket. Now, note, when you are trying to make a good brisket like you see here in the photograph, this is not done quickly. If you are talking about, cooking a nice sized brisket, you're talking about a process that is going to be taking 12, 13, 14 plus hours. Slow cooking to get what you want. Now imagine trying to cook that same brisket in a microwave. It ain't going to work. It's not going to be what you want. So when you think of how a brisket that is tasty and flavorful takes a long time, takes a lot of patience to get all the way through, that's how it works with legislation. It takes a long time. It takes a lot of patience. But the founders wanted it that way because whatever comes out is going to be, good. It's going to be necessary. It's going to be important. As opposed to something that is, rapidly created, something that's railroaded through the Congress that is not going to be good legislation. So, hey, if you think about legislation, think about brisket, Now, with that being said, let's take a look at some important data. For example, typically in each term of Congress, and remember we're talking about a 2-year term, you're going to have over 11,000 bills that are introduced. And of those thousands of bills that are introduced, only about 3% actually become law. So that stat right there should tell you that if you have designs of, crafting a bill that would become law, the odds are certainly stacked against you. It is very, very unlikely that any bill that you submit in a given term is going to become law. Now, with that being said, if you did want to introduce a bill into Congress, first off, keep in mind that bills can be introduced in either chamber. Take a look at this flow chart right here. You're talking about drafting a bill. You can see here from this flow chart that you can introduce that bill to either chamber to start out with. It can be introduced first in the Senate and then eventually go over to the House, or it can start in the House and then make its way to the Senate. At the end of the day, it's not super consequential where you start, because at the end of the day, if you want this bill to become law, it's got to pass through both chambers anyway. Now, that being said, keep in mind that if you are looking to introduce a revenue bill, a tax bill, it must be first introduced in the House. There's no, alternative to that. And as we've said before, the reason for that is that, you know, we have a sensitive history regarding taxation in our nation's history. And, you know, if you're going to be proposing a taxation bill, well, then it darn well better be coming from the people's chamber. So that's where it starts. But even a revenue bill, even a tax bill, still has to be approved by both chambers ultimately. Now, when it comes to crafting an actual bill, a lot of people think that it has to be actually written by a member of Congress, and that's false. Now, many are, but many aren't. In fact, you know, anybody can, in theory, create a bill. You know, I could write a bill, you could write a bill, anybody could write a bill. Interest groups commonly write bills. Anybody can write a bill. Now, that being said, whoever writes the bill, though, has to submit that bill to a member of Congress. Only a member of Congress can introduce that bill. A lot of times when a bill is introduced, that either author of the bill or the person that is introducing the bill formally will sometimes look for co-sponsors, you know, to kind of sign off as, you know, kind of supporting this bill in its initial form. But regardless, a member of Congress has to introduce that bill formally to get the process started. And when it is introduced, it's going to be assigned a number. If it's on the House side, it'll be called a House resolution. If it's on the Senate side, it'll be a Senate bill. And you can see here, I just made up some, you know, examples here, like, you know, something might be numbered HR 215 in the House, or something might be introduced as S21 in the Senate. You know, it's given a number, though, when it is formally introduced. Now, before we get into the traditional textbook process of how a bill becomes a law, we should also be aware of what are called resolutions. Now, resolutions are actions taken by Congress that are generally legislative in nature, but they do not follow the traditional lawmaking route. This is an exception to the idea of, you know, slow cooking something. So the idea is, you know, you want to do something fast, you want to do something quick, something that has to be taken care of, you know, in a very limited amount of time. Then you're going to go through the resolution route. And basically what a resolution is something's introduced to the chamber, and then it's, you know, voted on, you know, almost immediately after that. There might be some debate in there, but basically it's introduced in the full chamber, it is voted in the full chamber right then and there. Now, some of these resolutions are what we describe as simple resolutions. A simple resolution is an action that is done within one chamber. So you might have a House resolution, or you might have a Senate resolution. And what these resolutions do is they generally exist to establish some type of rule or some sort of guidance on what the chamber is going to be doing, or something that's going to be affecting the chamber. So, you know, for example, you know, the idea of, you know, a filibuster, as we'll get to later. The filibuster is the result of a simple resolution. That's just a rule for the Senate. You won't see filibusters anywhere mentioned in the Constitution. Sometimes they use simple resolutions for, you know, what are seemingly innocuous things, but, you know, these are, you know, this is politics, so you do things that can maybe be politically valuable to you. Like, for example, you know, you might have a member, introduce a simple resolution to recognize a fellow member of the chamber's birthday, and then you have a very quick vote to recognize that member's birthday. Or let's say, for example, that, you know, the Ohio State Buckeyes win the national championship in football. You might have an Ohio congressperson, introduce a resolution to recognize the Ohio Buckeyes for winning the national title, and then you would have members vote on that. Maybe folks from Alabama wouldn't vote yes on it, but the idea being that these are things that you're using Congress's time. It is part of the official record, but these are things that are not exactly legislative in nature, and you don't really want to be spending time in committee deciding whether or not you want to recognize Ohio State winning a national football championship. So these are done very quickly, very fast, for generally minor things. Concurrent resolutions are simple resolutions that affect both chambers simultaneously. Once again, they try to do with things that are procedural. For example, you might have a concurrent resolution to decide, when the full Congress decides to go on recess. Recess meaning a break, a vacation, if you will. Congress has to formally decide when to have those breaks and vacations, and so that would require a concurrent resolution. You don't really need to go through the full committee process to make that happen. Now, sometimes though these resolutions are legislative in nature, and these are dealing with items that have to be done very, very quickly, and they could be of a very serious nature. These are what we call joint resolutions. Now, a joint resolution, as opposed to a simple resolution, is something that does have the force of law. If it is all the way approved. So in other words, if you have a joint resolution that is passed in the House, that same joint resolution is passed in the Senate, and then that joint resolution is signed by the President, that is law. Now, as we'll talk here later on in subsequent videos, we're going to talk about the textbook process of how it's a slow process that takes a lot of time and can take months and months and months to get through. Well, imagine you've got a situation where you don't have months to act, but you have to act, and it is of a serious nature. Like, for example, following the attacks on the United States on September 11th, 2001, that was of such an extreme nature that Congress had to respond, had to start making movements to respond militarily. We could not, go through the committee process and wait months to decide if we wanted to militarily respond to what had happened. So you saw a congressional joint resolution to approve military action in response to 9/11. So the thing about resolutions is that they're basically designed so that you can do things quickly. That's really the design for it, which is the exception to what you normally do in Congress, which is actually do things, pretty slow. All right, I think we're going to leave it right there for now. We'll actually get into the textbook process of how a bill becomes law next time. We'll see you then.